Okay, so let's see. One thing that I did want to share with the group, let me share my screen briefly. The GBA Healthcare Working Group has a page on the GBA website that shows our upcoming events, including things like this roundtable. So you could click on, and I'll put the link in the chat so that you can peruse this at your leisure. But we schedule ahead of time our participants in these roundtable discussions so that people know who's coming to talk, and we give information about some of the projects that the Healthcare Working Group is engaging on. Currently, we are expounding on the work we've done in 2020, where the working group authored a white paper on creating a blockchain ethical design framework for healthcare. We thought that was very important because of all of the ethical conundrums that service providers and participants in healthcare have to undergo anyway. When you're layering on that an innovation that is immutable, could potentially harm people if it's not implemented thoughtfully and carefully, we thought that there was a real need in the industry for guidance of this sort. So after writing the white paper, we have started to devise elements of this blockchain ethical design framework, all of which we will be offering to the public as it gets created. But this resource that I'm showing you now, feel free to take a look at it at your leisure. I'm dropping the link in the chat. And I think that's all of the mouth running that I wanted to do personally about this. I'm really excited to introduce our featured speaker. He's a good friend of mine. Sean Mannion is the Chief Scientific Officer for Acquittium Health, and he is going to be giving us an overview of Acquittium Health's approach to applying blockchain to healthcare and life sciences. And he's also going to introduce one of the projects that Acquittium is undertaking. They've just launched the Acquittium Foundation, a nonprofit arm of that organization. Before I turn it over to Sean, I'll tell you, the first time I was exposed to the projects, the work that Acquittium is doing, it's back when it was known as Consensus Health, and I attended in DC a conference on blockchain and healthcare. This was maybe 2017 or 2018. At the time, I, like many people, was conflating blockchain with cryptocurrency. And I really wasn't interested in anything having to do with the financial tech until I went to that conference and found out that blockchain is an underlying technology that fosters peer-to-peer networking, high security encryption, distributed information, distributed ledger, distributed databases, and it wasn't cryptocurrency at all. And I saw the CEO of now Acquittium, Heather Flannery, give a talk that completely opened my eyes to the usefulness of blockchain in the healthcare milieu. And so I've always had a warm and fuzzy spot for that group. It seems they're involved in some really interesting, innovative efforts, and they've connected with some really smart people, Sean included. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mannion, and you can kind of take it from there.
That is awesome. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and for you and Gerard and Aaron and everybody else for having me here. I am, and Tori, I think you're right. That might have been.
I think it might have been.
Heather gave that talk, because that was I remember that year, and that was an awesome conference. So it's definitely a community that has a lot of interaction between each other in the blockchain and healthcare community. Not that the blockchain community overall does not, but the blockchain community focused on healthcare and life sciences has a different path to walk that perhaps hasn't moved forward as quickly as some of the other industry applications. And the whys of that are part of what we're going to discuss today, but part of what a lot of people spend time thinking about. There are differences in data, there are differences in regulatory, there are differences in culture in healthcare and life sciences that make it not just a plug and play of the technology from other industries, but really a working with those healthcare and life sciences industries to figure out how these technologies can advance what we're trying to do in healthcare and life sciences. If we really get down to it, is improve health outcomes, improve quality of life, make people's lives better. Although there's definitely challenges to doing that, and challenges to getting all the money that goes into research and advancing clinical care to continue to pay off. And I think the big value of blockchain is enabling some of that payoff to occur, and people were starting to realize that. Let me share my screen here. First test to see if I can pull that off successfully. Can you see my screen presentation? So
just before you jump in, Sean, I want to encourage anybody, if you have a question, put it in the chat. We want to try to hold any of our questions until Sean's finished with what he wants to share with us. But so you don't forget it, drop it in the chat, and then we can interact that way.
And we are going to have sort of I'll call it a break point halfway through. I've been asked to talk for about an hour or so. But I'm going to take the second half of this, and I'm going to be joined by Dr. Pierre Vigilance, who is not only our Acquittium Health VP of Social Impact and Population Health, but he is also now Executive Director of our Acquittium Foundation, which Marquis mentioned. And so we're going to spend the second half exploring that a little bit more informally and having a dialogue with him if he's able to make it back from Miami. And I joke he's on a call with some people in Miami, so that'll be there. But I did so. By way of background, and I think background is important when you hear people talk about blockchain, because people approach it from different areas, and especially in blockchain for healthcare and life sciences, there's a lot of different perspectives, and sometimes you need to get the right perspectives lined up, either within a single person, but more often along the lines of a team. And not everybody is going to be speaking about it the same way or sharing things the same way. I come from an academic and government background. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I did my doctorate at Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences as a civilian in the neuroscience program, but it introduced me to the world of military medicine. After a postdoc, I went and began working for almost 9 years for Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, which is a DoD-funded but VA-partnered organization, as first a contractor and then a federal civilian. And I got to learn a lot in that time frame about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to network research, when it comes to bench to bedside knowledge translation, when it comes to call it experiment to Congress policy translation that we had to do, and even back around again to gap analysis and understanding where future research dollars could go to. I learned a lot, and I met a lot of people doing a lot of great things, but I was always frustrated with the slowness of what's often called 17 years bench to bedside. And it was in 2016 that, again, thanks to government, Health and Human Services Office of the National Coordinator, Debbie Bucci, who's now our Chief Data Officer at Acquittium Health, held the first white paper contest for healthcare and life sciences. And that really was the genesis point for me and for a lot of others, seeing not only the 12 or 15 winners, but the 71 entrants that were coming from all over the world as people were looking at these technologies applied to healthcare and life sciences. And I realized there were a lot of solutions there for things that I needed to fix in my day-to-day in the federal government with network research. But it wasn't going to be an easy cut and paste. It wasn't going to be something that snapped into place. There were dynamics to the area of healthcare, an area of knowledge translation and knowledge discovery in life sciences that weren't necessarily the same as what was happening in finance or what was happening in supply chain. So I began an exploration. I left the federal government in 2017. I did some things solo. I wrote a book with a journalist, Yael Bazuti Kennedy, trying to explain blockchain for medical research from a conceptual level, at a blockchain 101 or even 051 level for all the scientists that I knew, and explain healthcare and life sciences at a simple level for all the technologists that I knew, and then give a picture of the future. And that came out in early 2020, right around the time that Consensus Health was spinning out of our parent company Consensus. We've recently rebranded to Acquittium Health. But I joined up day one of being an independent entity. Heather Flannery, who was mentioned before, the CEO and founder, said, "Hey, do you want to come be my chief scientific officer?" And I said, "You have more business background than me. You have a better tech team than anything I could ever approach. So yes, I do." And it has been great. As an academic, I'm going to recycle a presentation I gave last week. The reason being, one, convenience and reference and building off of something, but two, I was able to speak at University of Pittsburgh Health AI conference last week that was focused primarily on Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs, and focused on military health and veterans health. It really does have a relevance to a lot of the things happening in government right now. Those who are familiar know that VA has just dropped a request for proposals called VA Avail that has a blockchain component that they're looking at. Similarly, Defense Health Agency has just been instructed by Congress and the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2022, to incorporate, in government speak, the distributed ledger technology into a digital health strategy for DHA, along with all of the other emerging tech we know, AI, 3D printing, and so forth. And so it really is starting to get a new look in the federal government, not at just a one-off level, which there's many innovators in the federal government who've been looking for a while, but really at a broad agency level, and coming down from Congress. At the DHA has been told, you must incorporate this into what you're doing in the future. And that for me is very relevant. I was honored to be the only blockchain speaker, although we did have Dr. Roger Boodoo from DHA, who's working on that digital health strategy, to mention blockchain as well. And so it's got a high relevance to understand that blockchain took a little while in healthcare and life sciences, and will still take a little while in those elements of the federal government, but it's worth the wait, and we'll get into that. A lot of great partners that we work with go into the stuff I'm about to talk about, and I like to thank them up front. In particular, Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services, a nonprofit partner on our veterans-focused Vici initiative, along with Warrior Centric Health, Linux Foundation for Public Health have been great partners. And on the technology side, Microsoft and Intel with some of their confidential computing power that we utilize we're still a part of the Consensus Mesh company portfolio, and they have a small interest in us. So Consensus in their technologies, we don't need to rebuild all these technologies from a blockchain perspective. We need to find how to purpose them into healthcare and life sciences. And then if you've seen anything that we've been posting about lately, Nokia is a partner with us on building an Acquittium exchange, or an exchange for data that I'll touch upon briefly. And then Nokia Bell Labs, which I didn't even know until I discovered it a few months back. Nokia bought up the storied Bell Labs, and they're still doing all the great stuff they've done for a century. And we're working with them on edge devices and edge data, and how you can get that edge data to be part of a compute without ever moving or revealing that edge data. So that's some of the future stuff. And I think we're going to have a part 2 with my boss, Heather Flannery, next month, coming to the roundtable and being able to dive deeper into some of those details while I give you the big picture. I don't think I need to talk about blockchain to this audience as much as I did to the generally naive, blockchain naive audience last week at University of Pittsburgh. But as you know, the discussion is not simple and easy, and there's a lot of questions that pop up. These are all very important, but I think it's important to realize that blockchain, it's not just a new technology, it's a new category of technologies, and there are many different aspects to it. There are many different layers to it. There are many different components to it that are being applied. At its most simple layer, I like to just call it it's a trust layer and an audit layer. But the deployment of smart contracts on certain protocols, obviously the tokenization, which I do like to stress to healthcare audiences, is not option. It is optional and differs from cryptocurrency, though that cryptocurrency, from an incentivization standpoint, is a huge, powerful, advanced tool that can be used in healthcare as well. And of course, decentralized apps, all are aspects of what we're talking about when we're talking about blockchain. I also like to stress Amara's law. Poor Paul Krugman, got a Nobel Prize, so I don't feel too bad for him. But in '98, he dismissed the power of the internet because he didn't really understand Amara's law, and basically that we, in the short run, we overhype and we overestimate what the impact of technology will be, and in the long run, we underestimate it. And that's because we are humans and we are flawed. And if we aren't paying attention to those particular types of biases and flaws at any given moment, we fall into the same traps again and again and again. And I don't think this is any different. And if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, which is not really a cycle, it's actually a curve, but I digress. The way we even look at it is a little bit simplistic. I see blockchain on the Gartner hype cycle, or I see blockchain in healthcare on the Gartner hype cycle, but there's a variety of use cases at a variety of maturity levels that are moving forward at different paces and stalled or accelerated by different things that sometimes are technological, but sometimes are governance and societal and regulatory. And so being able to discern those things, being able to do a much more cold calculus as to where things stand and what the likelihood of impact is and size of impact down the line is not easy to do for humans. And so you get a lot of people who overhype things, and you get a lot of people who or react to the overhype and then underappreciate the value of the technology. And that's very important when you're talking to new audiences. So one of our general theses here is that we are working from is to try and make not just bigger data silos, but to eliminate data silos entirely, to be able to utilize these technologies, blockchain and other emerging technologies, to really distribute data and leave data where it is and not move it around as much, but instead allow access to data in a safe, secure, and privacy-preserving way across many different silos rather than bundling them all together. And there's a more advanced discussion of a lot of this, the data integrity and learning networks that we are developing. But again, that deeper dive will come in part 2. So I get asked a lot, and I wrote a book on blockchain for medical research and where it sits in healthcare, and I present on that to a lot of different audiences. And there's no easy way to say, well, where is it? What are the use cases that are moving forward? It's been a complex picture, and there are definitely pilots and even more advanced applications across the board in every different use case. But really, at a broad enterprise level, there's 3 systems, three categories of advances that we are seeing advance in different stages to very broad enterprise-wide use. The first are ones without PHI, and supply chain, which differs in some ways in pharma and healthcare than supply chain for food or supply chain for airplane parts, but has a lot of similarities. And Walmart has done more than anybody else in that group. Provider directories, UHG, along with their partners in Synaptic Health Alliance have tackled that a bit. Credentialing, and I know a number of different groups that have made some good headway on that, but none have stood out in broad acceptance that way. Stage 2, where you do have PHI involved, is really the walled garden of research. For anyone who knows research, if you can get patients to consent, you can do a lot more things with their data as long as you're telling them up front and having informed consent. There's a huge opportunity here within research, because I think we're here and we're ready to be able to apply many of these technologies in IRB approved research. But there's also research as its own thing that sits outside of healthcare, and there's some culture issues between healthcare proper and clinical research that don't always merge. And so I feel like this is one of the most underexplored areas that, especially in the federal government, as they're moving to explore it, could be valuable inroads. And then, of course, there's a variety of use cases when you get into protected health information, and these are some of the ones that we are exploring along with other groups and individuals. I think sometimes it's not appreciated just how many companies in healthcare are looking at blockchain technology. And these are just a handful of the consortia out there in healthcare and life sciences. The names here, stretch across the globe. The pharma ones here, the pharma-focused ones, are primarily in the EU. The payer provider ones primarily in the United States. Each of these is different, and we've had the good fortune to work directly in support of some of them and have relationships with others. And so we've gotten to see how things work in each of these instances. And really, There are technical barriers. I'm not going to say that there isn't, everything's perfect on the tech side, but there's a lot of business model barriers. There's a lot of structural and governance barriers. There's a lot of how do we do this beyond the tech? How do we even agree upon which protocol to use, or how to figure out what protocols we may want to incorporate into a particular use case? And so each of these in some ways has brought lessons learned, both internally for the groups as well as for groups like ours who study how these different groups are having successes and maybe in some instances not having success. So blockchain has disrupted finance in a very, very big way. And I'm not just talking about cryptocurrency, which, even with the bad times recently probably sits at about a $1.5 trillion market cap. So it's not really anything to be dismissed, but even just what the banking industry has been able to do, credit card industry has been able to do to reduce remittance time, to reduce windows of fraud is saving them tons of money. And they've just completely restructured around how to do that in many parts of the world. Finance is really just the tip of the iceberg as we see it. Healthcare and life sciences is going to be much, much bigger. And the reason it's taken a longer time, but the reason that it's going to be bigger is really broken down into these 4 categories. You've got identity as an issue that needs to be tackled, and there's a number of different approaches to that. And you could, put together a whole symposium on all of these. But you lose your identity, and maybe you lose some money, and that's important. It's not without value. But a wrong identity and the wrong drug going to somebody, or the wrong surgery happening to somebody, you can lose your life. And so that's very costly, and that's very challenging. Data integrity is something that I don't think people appreciate as much as well. Blood pressure is, a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. But a blood pressure measurement is much, much different if I've taken it, or if I've gotten it taken down at the CVS, or I've gotten it taken in the clinic, or I've gotten it taken by someone who's being extremely meticulous with it for the purposes of a research trial. And so the quality and integrity of that data is a very different picture of what's in finance and what's in healthcare. Data volume, and this one is I'm going to dive into a little bit more, is one of the most important aspects of difference. The data volume of financial transactions is not that big. It's in the big scheme of things, whereas the volume of data about you, the volume of medical data about you is huge. And that's both because of imaging data and things that are very large genomic data, but it's also because we're realizing more and more that health-related data, social determinants data, environmental data really plays as much, if not more, of a role in health and well-being and positive outcomes as the stuff that's on your electronic health records. And so the amount of data and the volume and size of some of that data is just continuing to grow. And of course, the consumer relationship is very, very different. We view blockchain as necessary but not sufficient to really transform healthcare. There are definitely use cases that are impactful with blockchain alone, but we think that decentralized AI, the federation of data, and privacy in depth are absolutely critical. Being able to leave data at rest and deploy an algorithm or deploy a query to that data and not have that data fully revealed, but only have limited amounts of that data even be read by that algorithm or read by that query, just enough so that it can send back the right derived data. That's the future that we think, with that volume of individuals' data growing, we will get to. If you think about a person, you think about the amount of data that you need about that person to make truly insightful precision medicine diagnostics and recommendations. It's growing bigger and bigger, and to try and centralize all that is just really becoming a losing cause. So we think that source data is not going to get moved around as much. It's not going to get copy and pasted as much. It's not going to get bundled together in huge honeypots that get hacked as much. It's going to stay at rest in a variety of different places. In some cases, those can be within a hospital system server or in a cloud server, but you don't need to get all of that data into a huge data lake in order to make it effective for personalized medicine. What you need to do is you need to be able to know what that data is, know that data's quality and provenance, understand what the metadata revolving around that is, even down to the detail of who took that blood pressure recording, or what time of day was it taken at, which may start to play into why somebody's blood pressure goes up or down in different instances. So being able to understand the data without having that data really is the way forward in what we see. And that's the future that we've been planning for and moving towards.
Hey, Sean,
When you,
I'm
please.
sorry to interrupt, but before we get too much further through, there was a question in the chat that was related to one of the slides that you just presented. So I didn't want you to get too far beyond it, but the slide that talked about the data volume of finance versus healthcare, RDC, and you can unmute yourself if you'd like and ask this question, or if you have a follow-up. Asked, how is data volume comparatively static in finance? And do you see the pinnacle of each data set, health versus finance, actually integrated in the end?
I would put it as the types of data in finance are simplistic. They are numbers, and numbers are not going to take up that much volume. They're really going to just take up an increasing linearly growing amount of space. Whereas the types of data, if you think of an image, one MRI scan of your brain probably is a larger data volume than everything that you need to know about yourself financially. The sheer volume of images, which isn't really something that needs to be represented in finance, but is in healthcare, is probably one of the main differences. The other is, and here I'll go back to the share, the types of data that are being shared. As those types of data that are being shared continue to grow, so it's not just your electronic health record, your claims, but it includes the financial data. So all your financial data is in effect part of your healthcare data. It is a subset of it, and there's a small subset. But other social determinant data, other genomic data, research subject data, wearables data, some of the stuff I mentioned we're doing with Nokia Bell Labs, there's an increasing amount of health relevant data that is out there that people are realizing if you are able to focus on the right questions and data about an individual using all of their data, not just what they get when they come into the clinic, that would be far more effective to getting truly personalized medicine. So that's kind of what I mean when I talk about that data volume, is one, that data type, images versus numbers, and one is the sheer types of data that go into your health relevant data to include that financial data.
RDC, I hope that answers your question. You've got 5 seconds to unmute if you had a follow-up. Otherwise, Sean can continue. RDC, anything else?
Hi, Sean. My name's Alex Dugum. I appreciate that. No, I think you're absolutely correct when you look at a company who has finances and transactions, and then you look at the marketplace. And I think one of the most exciting things about blockchain is you can have marketplace functionalities, systematic independent variables, factors, multiple types of transactions going on, and that's like very exponential. And I think also in fintech, what we're seeing, especially like with the biggest on top, and you go into the finance departments and the investment research departments at those companies, they're looking at data sets outside of that, and they're starting to actually look at how health influences personal health decision making and so on. So it's very exciting to see how money always matters to us, so we can get research and healthcare done and make it cheap and accessible. And then for them, it's also how can we make more money more accessible as well. So it's kind of exciting to hear both perspectives. Thanks so much.
Excellent. I see Dr. Vigilance is here. Yeah, hello. You made it back from Miami. Congratulations.
Begrudgingly, yes.
Outstanding.
All right. And let me get my screen back up.
And again, anybody that has questions, continue to post them in the chat. Daniel, I see your question. We'll hold that off until Dr. Mannion gets a little bit further in his presentation, but this is good stuff.
And so in the title of the talk I gave last week was at Health AI, and so thinking about decentralized AI, thinking about the value of blockchain and AI, not as discrete entities, but with blockchain providing almost an audit layer for where AI has been trained. If you're moving to a federated system where the data isn't moving around and staying in centralized repositories where people secretly have it and they train algorithms, you have no idea what they were trained on. You don't know if the individuals that it came from, or they might not even know if they just de-identified data somewhere, what those individuals' particular dynamics, but both demographics, inclusion, exclusion criteria, comorbidities may have contained. So you have no idea if that algorithm is even generalizable. And there's a very small amount, and there's been an interesting debate since last week when one of the professors at University of Pittsburgh mentioned that less than 1% of clinical AI, or less than 1% of health AI has been clinically validated. I've found some studies to support that, and I'd be interested to dive into those numbers even more. But the bottom line is AI and health AI is being created with little or no guardrails, understanding of what goes into the data, or understanding of whether it's actually going to help health outcomes. And so having an underlying audit layer becomes a very powerful way to provide that transparency. And we believe that that is going to be the case as well. Here I'm going to allude to the Acquittium Foundation that Dr. Vigilance and I will talk about a little bit more in a bit. But one of the things that I found impactful, because I have, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, and please do. Unfortunately, I've hit the 30,000 cap that LinkedIn has for connections, so I can only follow us at this point. My apologies for that. I'm trying to get LinkedIn to change, but I've even used the analogy that data is the new oil. But if you really take a look at it from an individual perspective, data is people. Data is information about an individual, whether it's healthcare, whether it's health-related information. And to some extent, we view data as being more akin to individuals' labor than it is, some sort of oil that can be tapped and exploited like it's a natural resource. It really does tie back to the individual, and we are setting up a system where the individual will be empowered to maintain control of their own data wherever it may sit, allow access to that data with consent when they feel it's appropriate, withdraw that access when they want to, and also be compensated or remunerated for that data, either in the form of direct compensation or offset with regard to, say, a tax credit. If I donate my healthcare data to a Health and Human Services study, I'm giving something of value to the government, and the government is using it to derive something of value towards their mission, and sometimes in conjunction with other companies that would be making money off of it. Shouldn't I get some sort of remuneration from that? And if it is for an altruistic or charitable reason, I can write it off my taxes if I make a monetary donation. Shouldn't I be able to write it off my taxes if I make a data donation? And that's one aspect of the future we're trying to create. And this is a complex picture I'm not going to spend time diving all the way into. But really the three pillars of a consumer-facing aspect, an enterprising-facing aspect, and that Acquittium exchange that allows for financial interaction between buyers of data and suppliers of data down to the individual level is what we're standing up simultaneously to create this ecosystem. This image in this picture is what Heather Flannery will go into much more deeply in part 2 of this next month, and other things that you may see her speaking at. I do want to highlight that when I talk about there being being able to have tax credits for people who are donating their data, being able to set up some of these structures are not things that can happen inside of a for-profit company. So really making sure that we have mission focus, really making sure that we can do all the different things necessary for this ecosystem. We decided that the Acquittium Foundation would be a very good idea to stand up, and we've recently done so, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Our first consumer-facing or individual-facing effort is for veterans and veterans' families. We've partnered with the Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services, who have a very succinct mission and a very important mission: work with purpose, heal with honor, and live with hope. And utilizing their outreach to not only the veterans community, but the 30 to 40,000 veteran service organizations that are out there. We view our technology as sort of a force multiplier for their matching resource to need, and then being able to refine down how to match people more effectively with their personal needs, how to better understand their personal needs, how to give them empowerment and control of their own data, how in some cases give them compensation for their data. And all of this is moving forward with something that we've consumer-facing app that we call the Health Enhancing Resource Orchestration, or HERO app. We demoed this at HIMSS, and there will be more about that coming out in weeks and months ahead. But this has been a very important partnership to move forward, really in a community of interest, and a community that sometimes gets overlooked. Some of these technologies as just a transformative component to what we can do and do better for individuals. It's mentioned here health utility grids after or sort of alongside our veterans-focused effort to set up what we call a data integrity and learning network. We are also doing something similar with populations in particular locations, and we're going to focus on underserved populations in U.S. metropolitan areas to set up health utility grids that will do much of the same. In the future, these data integrity and learning networks become something that can be interconnected, that can have the ability for data from them to be accessed by individuals and groups, whether it's for research or whether it's for better clinical care, but with the consent of the patient, with the remuneration of the patient, and with the empowerment of the patient in mind. And with that, I'm going to take it to the Acquittium Foundation, which, and I'll invite Dr. Vigilance to do more of an introduction than me, but as way of a segue, the Acquittium Foundation is a nonprofit that we have stood up under the Greer Institute for Leadership and Innovation. And the Greer Institute is a 501c3. We are a program within the Acquittium Foundation is a program within that. Dr. Melvin Greer is the founder of the Greer Institute, and he has been a very good advisor as well as a partner in this instance with us. In his day job, he is the Chief Data Officer for the Americas at Intel, with a number of other hats that he wears. And with that, I am going to invite Dr. Vigilance to talk a little bit more about the focus and interest of the foundation and some of the components of health equity and digital equity that it is hoping to accelerate. Over to you, Pierre.
Thank you very much, Sean, and good afternoon to everybody. I wasn't actually in Miami. I was in a meeting with people who constantly show me the palm trees and everything else behind them. Extremely obnoxious group, but I love working with them.
You don't have to take that from them.
Right. It's incredibly inappropriate, but it is what it is. But yeah, Pierre Vigilance, Executive Director for the Acquittium Foundation, also VP for Population Health and Social Impact for Acquittium Health. Just a quick background, clinically trained in emergency medicine, spent some time in the public sector, though, did some work for a nonprofit in East Baltimore running a substance abuse program that provided wraparound services through case management for people who were in methadone treatment back in the early 2000s, and then went into government, was an assistant commissioner for Baltimore City under Peter Bielenson for a couple of years, and then went into Baltimore County, was their health commissioner for a few years, and then into DC as their health commissioner for a few years until 2011, and then went into academia. I spent some time at GW, still there as an adjunct now in the Department of Health Policy and Management, but was their Associate Dean for Practice for a few years, trying to expand the view of practice. And so I have deep love and appreciation for work on the government side of things and the community side of things, as well as the academic side of things, and now moving into this space where all of these things sort of converge. It's a very interesting time to be involved in this health disparity and health equity work, particularly taking this technology angle as we do at Acquittium, both on the foundation and the sort of commercial side. The foundation is sort of set up as an opportunity for us to engage in a couple specific sets of activities that can inform not only those communities that we serve, but also us as an organization about how the digital journey is going, particularly for low middle income communities and underserved communities, and particularly communities of color that have long had and experienced disparities in healthcare and health outcomes. And, obviously we talk a lot about COVID and the impact that COVID has had on our understanding of this. These things are not new. These disparities are not new. These concerns and issues are not new. What is new and what continues to be new is the rate at which we accelerate into a digital future, and the gap that currently exists with respect to who gets access to that and how that is accessed. And there's long been conversation about the digital divide as a thing, and as a particular thing of concern to people who are in health and healthcare, I think on the public health side of things, we talk a bit about it with respect to engagement, but not necessarily as much as we should, which is coming up now as the digital divide and broadband and other things like that as being social determinants of health themselves, and how they impact how people are able to engage with the services that they may want to access, be those telehealth or related to monitors or devices, or just access to good, meaningful information that they can act on in a timely manner that may impact, say, their vaccination status or their decision about how they're going to move to or through a particular medical concern or health-related concern that they or their family may have. But we come at this from sort of a set of what I think are four sort of fundamental problems, if you will, with the way that data is used and accessed and understood by communities. And I think that there's a gap with respect to that. Health, we talk a lot about social determinants. Health itself is really only about 20% healthcare. The rest of it is social determinant oriented. And yet still, we tend to focus most of our data gathering around the health, relating to health, around the healthcare visit and around the electronic health record. That is the place that we've sort of wedged everything into. It's the sort of the point of entry to health data. And so health systems are trying to drag that information into a health record that is really only useful to them and not necessarily to the myriad of community partners and non-clinical partners who work with the patient and people who are in communities. So we've got that particular issue and that gap to fill on the gathering of information side of things. And so there's a point of view and some process with respect to education we have around that part of things. The digital divide itself, obviously, is a very real thing. Only there's about 25% of Medicaid households that don't have decent broadband access. And while that 25% means that 75% do, that's 25% of like 90 million people or something like that. It's a significant number of folks who are underserved by what access they have currently to certain technologies that would enable them to even involve themselves in telehealth or meaningful use of some of the many applications that are out there and other technology tools that are out there. So there's that end of things as well that's an issue. We know that if you can engage with telehealth and things like that, that things like readmissions can be reduced by as much as 4 times. I mean, it depends upon which studies you read, but there are some that suggest that there's significant opportunities around reducing readmission rates for ambulatory care sensitive conditions like congestive heart failure, for example, if you have better access to technology that can promote and allow you to have reliable telehealth visits. Something so simple seems to be a great opportunity to be able to fix that particular gap. And last but not least, while the social determinant data is something that's of interest to many health systems, less than 36% of them actually make use of it because social determinant data presents a new workflow and a new set of it creates some challenges with respect to work that needs to be done by systems that are not naturally set up to deal with non-clinical issues. And so we're very much about figuring out where are the partnerships and what kind of effective partnerships need to be built and what kind of extension of provider type do we need to be looking at in order to ensure that we're not overburdening an already overburdened provider group, that maybe the engagement of community health workers, promotores and others in communities, particularly low middle income communities, can and should have a role in sort of bridging these gaps in access to information, access to tools, access to knowledge, et cetera. So the education mandate is sort of cuts across a few different spaces, from community organization through to health system and into government partners and commercial partners as well. The research agenda that we would see ourselves undertaking is one that is very much about insight gathering so we can understand journeys and workflows for individuals in communities, community-based organizations, and some of the connectors to those two, so those community health workers and the like. And then the advocacy end of things, really advocating for and trying to ensure that the policies that are put in place, particularly that impact affordable housing, for example, or communities where housing stock may not naturally have high broadband internet coming into it, that some of those policies can be inclusive and ensure that communities that currently don't enjoy that kind of access can enjoy it. So we're early stage in our conversations right now with a few different folks around different things. That was part of my Miami conversation just now, was with some folks down there on the academic side, with some folks who also are on the municipal government side of things, to see if we can create some partnerships to get into to do some of this work that we think is pivotal, and to a number of different partners: philanthropy, government, the health tech sector, as well as academia and others. So we're really excited about what we're getting into here. Sean and I spend a good amount of time sort of throwing things around at each other with respect to how we're going to move certain things forward. So I'm very open to sort of see if there are any questions that people might have about this and how we might see ourselves as different, or just thoughts people have about any of those data points that I threw out there in the first place.
And with that, and Pierre and I like to throw a lot of things around, and one of which is I want to get to Miami for real and have our own boat down there. No, yeah, I joke. We're working on that. But there's a few questions in the chat, and we can start on some of those. But definitely with regard to the foundation and some of the stuff that Dr. Vigilance just introduced, are there any additional questions? Please put them in the chat, or maybe we can go through a couple that are already there, and then start to open up. And if not, I always have more questions for Pierre as well. There was a question about, and he might have left, Dr. Bourne asked about privacy, and whether or not in the exchange that we're setting up, individuals may be concerned about privacy. That is exactly what we think they will be concerned about. So in those three families of technology: decentralized AI, blockchain, the third is privacy preserving technologies. And those can be hardware solutions like Intel SGX, setting up a trusted execution environment so data can be processed without anybody ever seeing it. It can also be software solutions, homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge proof, that allow for federated learning across a wide array of data without that data ever being exposed. And utilizing those, and we're learning how to utilize them in combination, and what combinations work for the types of data and the types of query and the types of algorithm, because it's not a one-off. This is some of the hard work being done. We've got a great confidential compute and decentralized AI brain trust team out of Imperial College London in the UK, doing great work with our partners at Microsoft, Intel, and other folks. Keeping that data private is absolutely critical, and that's with the Vici effort in veterans. The stigma in PTSD is very significant. I did a lot of research in that area when I was in grad school and working for the federal government. If you're able to allow someone to have their data inform suggested recommendations, inform different treatment options, inform how their providers might be able to help them without ever revealing all of the details that they're not ready to reveal, that really is the goal of what we're trying to do. So that data stays not in a place that moves to whoever the researcher is, or whoever, whatever new hospital system they walk into, but is available for any query or any algorithm training that might go against it, without that data being revealed. And we think that is important not only for the veteran population, but a number of populations. Everybody really deserves that privacy, but there are a number of groups that for historic reasons have a lower level of trust in the healthcare system, a lower level of trust in clinical research, and many of those are underserved populations that we are seeking to help and give more trust in what we're setting up. We don't expect that trust to come to a tech company. We expect that trust to be part of a transfer between organizations that are already working with them, like the Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services with veterans, and like groups that Pierre and myself and others are starting to work with in different municipalities, so that we aren't the ones going directly to the community, but we have people within the community are able to work as that ambassador or champion for hey, this stuff is something that you can trust. These are people who aren't trying to get your data, like Facebook or something like that. These are people who want you to have control of your data, want you to be remunerated for that data. And so that's some of the answer to Dr. Bourne's question. Pierre, any other thoughts on the privacy component?
Let me feed you some of the questions that are in the chat. And thank you for that synopsis yet to Dr. Bourne's question. I think kind of maybe linked into that some kind of way was the question that Daniel Schott had posted. And Daniel, you can unmute if you had a follow-up, but he asked, what financial incentives will you use to encourage data silos like Epic to participate? It's very interesting. They're protective of their data assets, and anybody that works in healthcare knows that these EMRs, they're very covetous of sharing data outside of their repository. What are your thoughts on that, Sean?
On that one, you're right. It's not going to be easy to get groups of existing healthcare to just give up their data, especially if they've been making money off of it. But we can't let that be the barrier that it continues to be. So we'll work with those groups that want to be part of this, and we'll continue to empower patients to, under Cures Act and other ways where they're able to get their own data, to get that data, to have that data in a provable way that it hasn't been modified so that it stays clinically active, and be able to share that data in their own right. So to some extent, Epic might think it owns all of the data, but information blocking is illegal. And while there's not the systems in place across the private healthcare sector, the VA already has some very easy ways that veterans are able to access, identify themselves, access that data, and we've incorporated those that they've set up within the Lighthouse API into our app so that veterans can in fact get access to their own data quickly and easily. Those systems aren't yet in place across the broader industry, but they're being set up, and that whether it's groups that have set up something as functional and useful as Lighthouse API, whether it's payer provider organizations, and we're talking to a number of them who want to set those things up themselves, and many are working on it, or whether it's systems that we're able to set up that are applicable across different situations. It should be up to the individual to be able to access their own data, and if groups that have access to it now want to keep it together, bundled and de-identify and sell it in a slightly challenging way where it's less useful than consented data, they can still do that. But if they're able to be partnered with us, derive more value, derive better health outcomes from that data being available to providers in a different system or to researchers, we think that there will be move in the industry towards both prompted by Federal Cures Act, but also towards cleaner, better, more consented data that will move groups in that direction. Who moves first? We're seeing some of the primary movers, in the background right now. Who moves last? I can't say.
That's very good. I think going to the patient is very much out of the box to get around those issues, as far as who owns the data, who's going to let go of the data. And from my standpoint as a startup co-founder, I'd like to say, I'm committed to being a partner in this, however much that I can. And I think there's a lot of disclosures from an organizational standpoint that you have to give your users, and you have to, allow them to opt in and probably have a couple check boxes. But I certainly would be interested in participating, although we're probably a good year out from that.
Well, you guys definitely, I saw both of you had put your contact information in the chat. Be sure to reach out to each other privately so that you can be part of that journey. That's great. Let me touch on this other question from my friend Mark, who comes from the payer side. He's an insurance guy and a policy wonk, and we've had conversations about the intersection of how payers affect the healthcare ecosystem. He asks, and Mark, you can unmute if you had a follow-up to this. Would organizations that contribute data to the Acquittium data exchange have to give up custody or control of that data? And what levels of hygiene will be required of the data that's placed in the exchange? Sean, what are your thoughts?
Well, what they would be, I guess, not giving up, but adding in is allowing the patients to be the ones who control the access to that data. And that obviously is different than the dynamic now, but there are payer provider groups who realize it's moving towards that with the Federal Cures Act and other legislation, as well as cultural pushes. And we think that there's a number of groups that want that to enable that. Now, the difference between us and perhaps some of the other organizations, especially a lot of the AI organizations, that want to now be the new silo for the data. We don't want to be the new silo for the data. We're not trying to re-silo the data or create bigger silos. And so enabling payer providers to allow the data about a particular individual to be accessed and controlled at that individual's behest and consent is what we see the future moving towards, and the dialogues we're having with payer provider groups along with patients lend us that is the way it's going. Now, what does that mean? And the data hygiene was a great question, because data hygiene is a very big problem in any data querying data system. One of the biggest differences between financial data and healthcare or life sciences data is just the messiness of the data, the heterogeneity of the data. Data standards don't always exist. I was part of the traumatic brain injury group between DoD, VA, and HHS that set up the Federal Interagency Traumatic Brain Injury Research Informatics System, which is a centralized system and has its own challenges, but over the course of 7 years did set up a data standardization, both for cognitive data related to TBI as well as imaging data. It's a very arduous task to do, and there's a number of groups that we are working with. CDISC, and I'm blanking on the acronym for that, does sort of champion the move towards pointing towards data systems on a therapeutic or disease model level that have their data much more standardized. TBI, autism have done a lot of work in that area. There's also a newly stood up group about 1.5 years ago called Clinical Research Data Sharing Alliance, which is born out of CDISC, which is really looking across both regulatory research uses as well as other components of standardizing research methodology for collecting that data. And all of that goes into the metadata that we want to be able to tag. So it's not necessarily the case that you don't use data, it's that the data that you use has a 60% confidence level, 80% confidence level. Those aspects are still being defined. In many cases, they're going to be therapeutic model by therapeutic model. There's a lot of big steps and small steps that take place as we move that forward. The first use case we see viable is really just matching for clinical trials. We've done some work with Intel on the privacy preserving for that, but that's a relatively easy burden to get to with the current state of data. And if you look at, say, PharmaLedger, which is a blockchain consortium for pharmaceutical groups as well as sites for research in the EU, that's identified as one of the early use cases that they're going for, besides some of the supply chain stuff. Moving into more advanced use cases relating to precision medicine is really going to take different levels of data hygiene that have been achieved so far in data joining. And so it's going to be those independent groups and the standards groups that are able to really pave the path for some of that.
Great stuff, Sean.
Just add on to that real quick. What's going to be interesting going forward is getting an understanding of, so we can talk a lot about data, and this is sort of part of what we all do on this call, is sort of getting, and sort of the assumption may be, well, why wouldn't somebody want to necessarily own their data? But then it's sort of, and what would they do with it? We know what you might do with it, but do people understand what they actually might do with ownership of their data? So I liken it to, we drive cars. Do we all really know and understand everything that's in the technical manual with respect to our cars? And is that information that we want to have knowledge of, or do we just want to know that when we get in the car and hit the start button, the thing starts and that the steering works and the brakes work, etc. So the value of this data to people, I think, is something that is growing, and people's level of understanding and maturity with respect to it is beginning to come up. And I think industry may be way ahead of where people are, but I think that's another gap. That's another part of the divide that we don't often talk about, right? Which we think of divides as being, I don't have tech or I have tech. Well, do you have an understanding of what the value is of your data? And now owning it, what will that mean to you in situation A versus situation B? So this is all a very interesting space to be in at the moment, and one that we're all going to be learning a lot about in the next couple of years, I'm sure.
Excellent, Pierre. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things where you're starting to hear a lot about this self-sovereignty of people's health data one of the things that I look at, because, I have a background in risk management, so I sit there and always look at the tough questions and, ask try and find the answers no one really wants to give and stuff. But, right now, I mean, some of us have been around the sun a few times. And what do you think it would take to assemble our healthcare data? Going back to, because most of that is going to be stored in definitely formats, but no small amount of it's going to be in a banker's box in an Iron Mountain repository somewhere.
Suppository is good too.
Yeah, and what would it take to assemble all of that? And I see an emerging cottage industry of doing that detective work, of saying, hey, how can I assemble all of this? Because it's almost like you want to talk to the ancestry.com people, because they have to do all of this research, in all these disparate, non-technical data, sources and stuff to try and assemble everything that's going to be you.
Yeah.
So that's also interesting. But back to Sean's point, to where was talking about organizations that would contribute data to an exchange. I've seen there are a lot of organizations out there that have these enormous data lakes and are really having a tough time able to actually monetize them. They want to, but just because of privacy, because of CARES Act and HIPAA and PHI, they have to be very careful as far as how that what happens with that data leaves their borders. And so would that require giving up an element of custody and control of it, which is a deal killer for them, but also at the same time that, if you want to look at doing an exchange similar to like Snowflake or Informatica, to where by the time that data is put on their marketplace at a level that has been, gone through the sufficient levels of hygiene and it's digestible for whoever wants to go ahead and access it, by then it's probably 3 months old. And so, especially in, if you look at a clinical trial where real-time data, is of, much higher value. And that's where, I see the trusted execution environments to where, fine, we'll go ahead and give you this, ability to go ahead and compute this encrypted data so that we don't run afoul of the data privacy framework. But at the same time, I would imagine, having to set up a trusted execution environment and administer it and then, curate the output, is going to be a lot more expensive than someone that says, I just need population data for between these dates for this particular type of, health concern. How can I get that?
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of times and I need fresher data than what I can normally find on a standard, Snowflake or Informatica.
And figuring out which queries and which algorithms can be trained on not only the populations that first come into this system, but the data that's coming into the system is part of the step ladder approach that we're trying to figure out, because it's not going to be all at once. This doesn't snap into existence very quickly, which is why doing things like clinical trial matching, which has a significant amount of cost for the pharma industry and is a big interest for them, if there's ways that they can find, even identifying cities where the right populations with the right inclusion exclusion criteria exist, so they can select cities for a trial more acutely, more accurately. That's of high value to them. So starting with the baby steps from a data perspective like that is one of the ways that we're hoping to get there.
Yeah, super good. You know what? And we kind of touched on it just a few minutes ago. I had a question early on that I think has been partially answered. Sean, when you mentioned that data is the new oil, it's really the new resource that everybody's trying to figure out how to tap into, to commoditize and to profit on. And that data is people. Pierre had touched on the subject that from the consumer side, the desire for using innovation tech that fosters ownership of their data is growing. And I kind of would want to open this up to the larger group, everybody's experiences in their little corner of tech or their professional milieu. What's the appetite for consumers to participate in initiatives like this, where their data can be their data can be created in a digital asset where the ownership is tied to them. And then to Pierre's point, which I think is spot on, do people know what to do with this stuff? What do you guys think? What's the real appetite? Is it growing significantly enough for this to be a worthwhile enterprise beyond just trying to proselytize it to enterprise groups and have them adopt a solution that, you know, makes it more efficient to audit data and you know, to create discrete data assets, etc. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do. I'll see. Pierre, do you have any thoughts, or are there thoughts from the audience first? Because
Yeah, no,
taxonomy of people's interests is
I
something I can
do.
dive into.
I'm very curious to hear what the audience has to say, because I have a point of view on this, but yeah, ears wide open.
I'm particularly interested in this. Well,
I mean, if no one else has something, I will say briefly, I've looked into this. Actually, yesterday, I got to be an individual who's writing his graduate thesis on people's interests in their data being utilized and what motivates them to be part of that, which is beautiful, because that's what I've been spending time informally studying. You know, it's not 0% of people right now that want to hold their own data and be rewarded for it or get something back for it rather than have other people have it. But it's not 100%. What that percentage is, I don't know, but it's somewhere between 0 and 100, and it's growing, I think, because we're moving into a culture that has identified problems with large amounts of data being out there. One, people monetizing your data and you not being part of it. Two, people utilizing your data to manipulate you, which is becoming an increasing problem with respect to AI algorithms that feed you the news that they want you to hear, sort of thing. It is a cultural interest in avoiding those outcomes that I think is driving the movement forward. I think some people like the idea of controlling their data or being empowered to do that. Some people and these are overlapping groups, like the idea of getting some sort of compensation for their data. I think to some individuals, how much are you going to give me? And the question then becomes not just, well, if you're giving me a small amount, I'm not going to do it, but maybe you would do it for a larger amount. And can we get data clean enough and enough value, get that noise level down and that signal level up, so the return on investment on research becomes so high that contributing your data actually increases in volume from what you could get on the open market for it now, which isn't a whole lot. There's also a weighted attribution component. If you think about it, not all data is equal in algorithm training or developing a clinical decision tool. So there's some components of your data might be worth more if you do become part of the study, and it does help to inform the algorithm. You know, the idea being, you know, taken to the extreme. If you think about all of the cancer research that has been done and all of the value that has been derived from the HeLa cells of Henrietta Lacks, that particular set of cells from one individual who, you know, very unfortunately at the time not only died of very aggressive cancer, but just without any consent had her biosample utilized, and it continues to be utilized. That volume of the value of those cells is huge. Well, what does the volume of, or what is the value of any particular data that's used to derive, you know, some model or some drug or some device? That can be variant, and individuals may have something very, very valuable. Unfortunately, oftentimes the most valuable stuff is individuals who have things wrong with them. But being able to reward them on a much higher level becomes something that is possible as well. So you have not only the monetization, but you have the monetization with maybe a weighted attribution, giving people a chance to see what they can get with their data. But there's altruistic components from a taxonomy of why people want to be part of this. You may be contributing to a more enhanced and better and faster research. You know, my own mother died of cancer, and I knew how slow the process was at the time. So I knew that the studies wouldn't get there. But if there was a way that people could contribute safely and privately to accelerating that finding solutions, I think, and just like you have people who donate bone marrow or donate kidneys, sometimes even to strangers, you'd get a lot of people who, you know, oh, I can donate my data and help accelerate that process of discovering things that can help other people. So there's a number of different areas of motivation, and figuring out what those motivations are and educating people about that and earning their trust that you're going to be doing that. Those are the ways to improve it.
So just very quickly, there was a time when if you had said to somebody that they should go up to a hole in a wall and punch in a bunch of numbers and deposit their weekly earnings into that wall, because that was how it was going to get into the bank, that they would tell you you were nuts. And if you were to do the same thing in order to get money and not have to speak to a teller, not have to deal with somebody in particular, that you were absolutely crazy, that was not a real way to actually transact a financial financial interaction with a bank. and here we are. We've moved a great deal of distance, and I think that there's a difference between what people, if you ask somebody, would you like to own your data? That's one question, but then you ask them the other question, which I think was alluded to before, which is, would you like to have access, control, and to privately and some ability to decide where your data goes, given some pre-knowledge of, which most of us don't have, of where our data currently goes, then ask the question, would you like to own your data? Then I think that the question takes on a different set of meaning. So I think we're asking the question maybe in a setting or in settings where people are not fully aware of where their data currently move, how their data currently moves, and what little control they have, even though they may have some access, what little control they may have on that movement. And I think that once people can be more clear on those things, then ownership becomes a bit more of a priority, potentially, for some people. I'm not suggesting this is going to be for everybody, because we're still going to have folks there still will be people who, just as with health, are not able to prioritize their health because they have to prioritize other things in their life. So some people may not prioritize their data because they have to prioritize other things in their life, and I can respect that. But I think the ownership question needs to sort of be maybe sort of preamble should be, are you aware of where your data is currently going, and what it's currently doing and how it's currently being used? Would you like to have more control over that? And if the answer to those questions are, no, I didn't know where it was going, yes, I'd like more control, then the answer to those questions may be, well, ownership is potentially something good for you. And I see Susan's waving her hand. And I may have.
I wanted to say that I lead the voting working group here at GBA, and it occurs to me that people could vote. You don't have to store it because of blockchain. You don't have to store it in one place. You could have it in multiple places, and you could use the voting app to direct the data to a second node.
Yes, so the how is, there are multiple hows, and I think that's a great example. But I think that the fundamental question for a lot of people is, do you know where your data goes and how it gets there, and that you consent to that happening now? Would you like to have more control over that? And this sort of opens up a whole bunch of different questions around ownership in my mind.
Yeah, and it's the conundrum of educating the masses on what, not just blockchain technology, but what data ownership is good for. Because we as a society, especially in Western society, are so accustomed to pushing off our digital responsibilities to some cloud provider or to some vendor. We don't even want to remember our passwords, right? And so when our data is commoditized by a health organization or by somebody that, we opt in, perhaps unknowingly, because the consent mechanisms are kind of blurry, and that's a whole other thing. When some other group makes money off of our data, a lot of people are oblivious to this. And in having conversations with friends and even professional contacts and technologists about commoditizing data and ownership of data, there are a lot of people that don't see the value, aside from making sure that they're not victimized in any way, that their data is not stolen or not used for something that they don't consent to. A lot of people just don't see, oh, well, you know, if I have an episode of care that I present to that's unique, there might be some research group, some pharmaceutical clinical trial group that would value that experience that I had and will pay me, you know, whatever it is. But I think what it boils down to, what I'm hearing, is that there is an appetite, albeit a small one now, but that's rooted in the non-education, and even in some cases, the miseducation of the masses on what data ownership is valuable for. Hey, bud, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't. I thought I was on mute. I'm
Well,
glad.
now
I
that
said
you're
something.
that you're not on mute, you have the opportunity to.
Well, you know, that's a great conversation. I had been involved with a company called Encryption for a while, and they did exactly what you all are talking about. I came in a little in the middle here, but it created a marketplace for the transactions of genomic data from individuals and research types. So it really used the chain to secure and allow a marketplace to survive, to get in place. And it didn't seem so much like there's an education part to the consumer, but there's a bigger education part to those that would like to go find that data, because it's very provincialized right now and everybody protects their own turf. So while they say, well, we can open up genomes for South America, Africa, Asia, and all this, it sounds really nice. However, breaking the code there to get everybody in is a little bit of a challenge. And using a token helps facilitate the monetization and the transactions. So I think you know, there's a number of companies that attempted to do it with genomics, and that's one area, you know, of this privatization and keeping data valuable to me. And the other side is the electronic medical record, where it's valuable to me because I want to make sure I'm taken care of properly. You know, it's not even the money, it's really making sure that my data is assembled correctly and provided to the right people correctly, so that I can now have a interaction with a physician that means a little bit more than it was, you know, a while back.
Yeah, and provided to the right people in measured amounts of time, not just giving your information away so that they have access to it, you know, forever and ever. Amen. It's a good point.
Yeah, it's common. I mean, there's other apps out there that are using it, are trying to get it right down to this to the cell phone, you know, to your personal phone. So, and you know, it draws a pretty neat line between consumer and patient data, and when do you need it, and how do I use it? Those types of questions. So there's a lot of, yeah, as somebody alluded to, you know, getting the populations acclimated. I think there's a little bit of that that's going to be in the future.
And that's very, very important. Very, and I go back to, and I'm familiar with Encryption, and David Kopsel is one of our advisors, and there have been a number of efforts to do this, and some of them have been different levels of success, and some are still ongoing. We've looked at the business model for those, and sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's business model, what people need back, what gets them involved. You know, one of the reasons we're focused on the veteran community to start is that there's a lot of individuals who fall through the gaps. Only a minority of veterans that are eligible for VA care actually get it. And so a lot of the care happens either in the private sector or sometimes doesn't happen at all. And being able to give them a baseline offering of matching them resource to need so they even come onto the system to begin with is really critical. I mean, that's great. You're offering me tokens and, all this future stuff I don't understand. What are you giving me today? Well, you put this app on your phone that's going to point you to all of those 30,000, veteran service organizations and identify for you based on your data where it is you can go and get the help you need in your location. So you don't spend your entire weekend searching through some directory of VSOs that still aren't active, or maybe aren't accepting, someone who's, got TBI. They're only dealing with pure PTSD with no TBI. These offerings beyond just, hey, here's data and here's exchange, are part of what brings people to the table, part of what keeps them there, and a really critical component. And some of that is going to differ population by population. Some of that is going to differ therapeutic model by therapeutic model. We've talked to groups that are, patient-centered outcomes research, Corey funded, who have a very tight and coherent community of interest that includes patients, patient advocates, family caregivers, providers, and researchers. And if you could put something together that connected that already existent patient community, whether it's for cystic fibrosis or cerebral palsy or autism, you may be able to find utility across a community of interest on a therapeutic model or a disease model that gets far more traction more quickly because they've already got an interest in this. And for some, the monetization may be important. For others, it may not be. Looking at all of those, and we view these data integrity and learning networks as really aligning, each one aligning around a particular population. In the case of veterans and veterans families, we're looking at a population. And geography is the second alignment factor, and that's metropolitan area by metropolitan area, and even talking with folks overseas in Europe and Africa, where it might be of interest to have groups starting perhaps with underserved populations in these particular areas, but moving to everybody eventually. And then geography becomes the defining factor of that group, of that data integrity and learning network. And the third is that therapeutic area, the disease model that I talked about. All of these have interoperability in the future, though, so they don't stand alone. They actually start to integrate into the entire ecosystem. So if a research sponsor or an individual researcher or a pharma company says, hey, I need to find this type of individual, this type of demographic, this type of inclusion exclusion criteria, where do I even go for that? Are they available? And where do I find ones that may be inclined to consent to not only providing prospective data, but also their health associated data, their social determinants health, maybe even their financial health being part of what they'll consent to be used, and do it in a privacy preserving way, allowing us to ask much deeper and much more refined questions and trust the signal that we get back from the data a lot more, because we know where that data came from, we know the cleanness or quality of that data, and all of that becomes the future that we think can be created, not only by what we're doing, but by a number of different efforts happening across both legacy healthcare and life sciences systems, as well as a bunch of novel groups. This really, it doesn't, as I mentioned with the consortia earlier, is the consortium model for use of blockchain for healthcare and life sciences is a very powerful tool, because it brings together groups that haven't been brought together before. It de-silos information, whether that's for a supply chain case with pharma, or whether that's for a precision medicine case with a number of different private companies, government agencies, payer provider organizations, all coming together to align the data about a person to make it available for providers or researchers and have that patient involved in their own decision making. So it's a complex picture. We've decided to do something complex rather than lean startup model, do an app and roll it forward, which unfortunately a lot of the VC, that's all they've known, that's all they've ever known. And so they say, this is too complex, you have to make it simple. Well, making it simple is one of the reasons we're still using fax machines in health tech. If you don't ever use simple, if you don't ever do anything that's not simple, you never get past simple. I call it the steady diet of low-hanging fruit, and the malnutrition in innovation that occurs from that. If you
Yeah.
only ever go after low-hanging fruit, you can never get to complex things. And then we throw up our hands and, oh, it's the regulators' fault, or it's these people's fault, why we're still using fax machines. Well, there's a little bit of fault to go around all around. And there's, if investment is always scared of moving forward, if government is always waiting for industry to lead things, if large organizations are comfortable where they are and don't want to try new things, you're never going to get new things that aren't just incrementalism. And getting transformational change may be a higher risk effort, but not only from a financial standpoint, but from a human advance standpoint, I think it's worth it. So that's why we're trying to do something a little bit more bigger and complex.
And Dr. Ann said, can we all say amen? Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Ann.
I'm glad we got that on a soundbite. A steady diet of low-hanging fruit kind of leads to the malnutrition of being able to figure out complex systems. And that's so true. When my organization, when my company is looking at backers or people that are interested, and we've talked to potential groups to find out, oh, well, it's so complex. Can you simplify it some? I think you made the perfect point. At some point, we're going to have to say, no, we have to figure out all of the complex subsystems that are connected in health service delivery and in patient care and in the individual's health journey, their experience, in order to come up with solutions that don't victimize the patients, allow the patients and the providers to see value, and on and on. And the last thing, especially since we just mentioned Dr. Ann, I'm really encouraged when I hear of examples of organizations that concern themselves with behavioral health, like the Vici initiative that Acquittium is working with for veterans. I'm sure a big swath of that is around behavioral health, as you said, traumatic brain injury and so forth. Dr. Ann, I know that your organization, EHT Advisors, has stood up a blockchain-powered solution that's rooted in behavioral health services for at-risk populations. And so because there's such a high need, especially post-COVID, everybody's a little bit bananas, right? And that's not even the people that had real issues to begin with before the pandemic. There is an alarming number of people that are in need of behavioral health services, behavioral health care, using blockchain technology potentially in some of these exchanges, and keeping the data auditable and private and secure and anonymized, to the point that Dr. Joshua Bourne had put in the chat, is critical for adoption. I think that's a really good platform to make an example to the rest of healthcare that this is a viable technology to ensure security and provenance of data and all the things that we know and love about blockchain. All right, really good. Well, we're about 20 or so minutes to the top of the hour, and these sessions typically go from noon East Coast time to 2 p.m. At this point, we've covered a whole lot of data. We I see some folks have been kind of shuffling out. Sean, and I see Dr. Vigilance has dropped off for another engagement. Sean, do you have anything else that you wanted to close with? And by the way, just to let everybody know, the session's been recorded. We will post this on the GBA YouTube channel. I will have a link to this session available on the GBA Healthcare Working Groups page for the Healthcare Roundtables, so that people that weren't able to attend the entire event or people that weren't able to be here can still benefit from this. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Acquittium's journey and talking to Heather Flannery. But Sean, is there anything else that you wanted to close with? Anything else that you wanted to talk about last?
I'm gonna close it with just something that ties back into the opening, where the presentation I gave was last week at University of Pittsburgh for a DoD and VA audience, and blockchain has been introduced by the NDAA for the DoD to incorporate it into their DHA digital health strategy. The VA is now starting to look more closely. Since then, DHA has awarded a $10 billion omnibus military research contract to 56 organizations, one of whom is that same group at Pitt that was hosting that, Ron Kuropatich and the folks there. So the relevance is not just in Congress saying, hey, you should be looking at this, and DHA saying, hey, we're looking at this, and the folks that I got to talk to last week saying, hey, we're looking at blockchain and how can it incorporate with AI. But the money that I said, people need to put the money where the mission is seemingly in place with regard to this. And there's a number of groups, and some that are connected with GBA. I know Tim Gilday and GDIT, were part of this award, and University of Pittsburgh and Ron Kuropatich, and the Mags and the folks at Leidos. There's a lot of people who are in and around the federal government, and the names and some of the smaller names. But what was interesting is this contract and all the bids for it were written before the NDAA. So blockchain wasn't a requirement when this was written, but you had the head of research, Brigadier General Simonson. She was at the event last week, noting, and Dr. Voodoo noting that now they have to incorporate blockchain into things. So there may be opportunity in the near future for blockchain to work its way materially into a lot of the work that DHA is doing. I'm not a Fed anymore, so I can't say, if and when that's going to happen, but it seems to be lining up for blockchain's moment in medical research and in clinical care and knowledge translation. So from a government blockchain association perspective, I feel like that would be of high relevance to your audience. So just make a note of that. And with that, I'll just thank you and Marquis and Gerard and Aaron for setting this up, and in the audience for everything. This has been great dialogue, and really looking forward to part 2 next month, where diving into some of the details of this, and probably some that haven't been made public yet by then will be able to be shared. So very, very happy to be part of this. Thank you.
That's great. Sean, my friend, thanks. This was so enlightening, such an encouraging conversation to see some real strides being made in the blockchain space in healthcare. To your point just now about this $10 billion DHA award, I'm connected into the GovCon space just peripherally. My organization has been looking to work in that niche, and we have some folks that are helping us with that. And so being privy to some of the contract vehicles and some of the task orders that are coming down from agencies that are they're kind of denoting that agencies are putting a greater emphasis on implementing innovation in government processes and systems, so that we don't get left behind either competitively or from a security perspective, or that our economy doesn't get bolstered appropriately. Seeing task order after task order that is looking for innovators to teach the government about blockchain or implement a solution that uses AI and machine learning. It makes me feel like we're in the right place at the right time as technologists and professionals in this space. So once again, great stuff. I'm really encouraged about Acquittium's journey. Looking forward to hearing more about it. If anybody has any last comments, now's the time to jump in. My friend Tyler just said, thanks everyone for the valuable information. I'm glad that you could join. Tyler is a software developer, and I know that he's been developing an interest in blockchain technology. I'm going to leave this session open until the top of the hour, and then we'll shut it down. So if anybody wants to go through the chat, collect information from people that posted their contact info in the chat, please do so. Reach out to me. I'm going to drop my information in the chat as well. I think actually probably everybody has my information, but I'll do it anyway. Reach out to me if you wanted information about the GBA Healthcare Working Group. And With that, Gerard, any last, any parting wisdom that you'd like to share? And if he doesn't come off mute in 3, 2, 1, we can call that a wrap, and I can give everybody 12 minutes back to their day.
Awesome. Thanks,
Sean,
everyone.
Thanks a lot. We'll see everybody next month, the 3rd Thursday, for part 2 with Acquittium Health.
Awesome.
Bye for now.
Thank you.